Why can't everybody have the joy that I feel now? Why can't everybody have the freedom that I feel now? And then at some point we have a tendency to, all the stuff we dropped when we realize who Jesus is, we begin to incrementally begin to pick it back up and to bear that burden again and think we have to do this all alone when our salvation was based entirely upon what Jesus did in the first place. We experience the freedom, we experience liberation, we say we don't want to bring those things back on ourselves. And we want to make a point of sharing this idea with everybody that we know. Not because of who they can be, but because of who they are. So how do I do that? Let's make that practical. I've talked about this idea for a while because I believe that life change rarely happens through incidental conversations. In other words, there's not a lot of time that people come up to me or come up to you and say, hey, I know you go to church. I want to find out more about Jesus. Like that doesn't happen very often. It might, but that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, it's a culture that we develop in our life to say, I want to make sure that I'm intentional about this. And I want to make sure I'm intentional about doing a couple of things. First, I want to identify who I'm supposed to invest in. I just begin looking at my life, looking at what God has in front of me. And I begin looking at, God, what do you want me to do? And even beginning praying about, God, give me wisdom and discernment. Who are the people or who is the person that I'm supposed to be investing in my life? And once I have discernment about who that person is, then I start intentionally praying for that person. Not incidental stuff. I'm talking about I say, I want to make a point. I want to set a reminder at a certain time every day that I'm going to pray for my neighbor, that I'm going to pray for my sister, that I'm going to pray for my coworker, and that at this point every day I'm making sure at least once a day that I'm praying for this person that they would come to experience the freedom that I've encountered in Jesus. See, these conversations don't happen incidentally. They happen intentionally. So identify who the person is. I begin praying for the person. And then as God begins to bring opportunities into my life, I then make a point to intentionally invest in that person's life. And it might begin like we've just talked about. I have a friend of mine, and I absolutely love and cherish this friend, but probably about once a month, he calls me up or he texts me and he says, hey man, how's life going? And I'll normally through text, I'll say, hey, pretty good. But I think that's how we all answer that question. And he's like, yeah, let's get coffee and talk about it. And then we do that. We have conversations, and we intend to sit down for an hour at a time. We say, I only got an hour. Let's sit down at 9 o'clock on Tuesday. And only about an hour and a half or 2 hours into that conversation, we say, we really got to get back to work. But we each have to look for friendships like that, where we can intentionally invest in people's lives. Because incidentally, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen by saying, hey, at some point we're going to get together, saying, hey, I know life is busy. But if it means me waking up an hour early once a week or an hour and a half early once a week to have those conversations, or maybe every other week to have those conversations, I want to be able to do that.